You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hey, welcome to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. Well, welcome to the start of our 2025 season. It's happy 16 years at Heritage Radio Network. I mean, I can't believe it's been that long. You know, Kate, you've been on before, and Zach as well. So, it really wanted to kick off the year with you guys. But for our listeners, don't forget, it's HRN, Heritage Radio Network. Support us, become a member at heritageradionetwork.org. A few changes this year. Most of our winter shows will be online, and we'll also be setting up a number of remote in-person shows. For this winter, we won't be going into the studio, but we'll have a lot of new options coming up in 2025. So I wanted to kick off this year. One of the things that got me involved in craft beer way back in the 2000s was draft beer. And our friend Kate wrote a nice article in Bon Appetit, The Slow Decline of Drinking Draft Beer at Bars. So we're going to talk about draft beer and bars. So Kate and Zach, why don't you guys just give yourselves a short introduction?
Sure. Thank you for having me. It is a pleasure to be here with two people that I love to talk about beer with. So my name is Kate Bernat. I am an analyst and a reporter. I've covered beverage alcohol for more than a decade at this point. Most of my work on the analysis side appears at Sightlines. That's sightlines.news. It's a insights platform for beverage alcohol decision makers. And then I do freelance writing as well, consumer facing and trade stuff. And this Bon Appetit article is just one example of that. So you can find my byline writing about booze and beer and food in a few different places.
Thanks, Kate. And it's always great to read your articles.
I agree. I'm Zach, and it's great to be back with you guys. I can't believe how long it's been. You said 16 years, and that's kind of blowing my mind. But I love being able to chat with you guys, and I feel like this is the perfect way to start the new year. So great to be back. So I'm Zach Mack. I own a couple of restaurants in New York City, but namely Alphabet City Beer Co. in the East Village. I'm a beer writer as well, not as esteemed as Kate, covering the business side of stuff, but I do some fun articles here and there amongst travel and a couple other things. But yeah, I'm still going strong. Our bar will be 13 in May. So I finally have some almost veteran status to my name for the service side of the beer industry, which is weird to think about too. So just we have a lot to talk about today though, because Kate's article was really eye-opening for me and really struck a chord with me. So I'm really glad we get to talk about it.
Yeah, no, I thought you'd be a great guest for it, Zach. And, I've got many fond memories of sitting at your spot, Alphabet City Beer Company on Avenue C, and, drinking the latest IPA when it was Innerbar or Threes or one of the many great selections we always had on. But Kate, why this article? I thought it was pretty prescient, and it got me in the gut.
Yes, well, same. So I, though I cover a lot of different types of food and beverage stories, like beer is extremely close to my heart, and draft beer is extremely close to my heart. I think it's a very emotional product. It's something that is multi-sensory. It has texture and aroma and flavor and visual appeal and tactile sensations. It's also something that you encounter usually in public with other people. So the setting matters, the place matters, maybe the music matters, maybe the crowd around you matters, the temperature it's served at. It's just a very involved way to drink beer, which I think connects it to a lot of our emotions. And draft beer is what got me interested in craft beer. I was in college, I was living in Chicago, and my boss at the time found out I had never been to the Hop Leaf Bar and said that was a travesty and embarrassing, and took a bunch of us 20-something-year-old employees to the Hop Leaf, and I'm looking at this crazy menu of Belgian beers. I have no idea what to order. I can't pronounce half of them. And I see a server walk by with the giant wooden, I don't even know what to call it, a handle, I don't know, some kind of a presentation
Paddle?
for the Kvak, the Kvak beer.
Oh, Kvak. Yes.
And I was just like, I want whatever that is. And that was sort of my introduction to the beautiful realm of Belgian beers and American craft beers. And because of that multi-sensory experience, right? I saw something cool. I wanted that experience. So anyway, sorry, this is a very long way of answering your question, but.
Oh no, this is a long form
okay,
radio.
Perfect.
Kid.
People are along for the ride. So draft beer is important to me on sort of a personal level. I also know it's incredibly important to the industry, to sales, to margins, to bars as a business. And when I came across recent data on just how sort of beleaguered draft beer was, it really hasn't. It's been on a decline even before the pandemic, but its declines have accelerated since the pandemic. Like the trend line was going downwards, and then it steepened its downward descent, even after the pandemic. It just really hasn't bounced back. And that made me think about all the implications that has for drinkers, for bar owners, for breweries, for everyone, for our culture, really, of drinking in America. And somehow I was going to distill that all into one magazine article.
Well, I don't know if there's anything that, Zach, do you think there's anything that she didn't cover in that article? Because I have a few things I'd like to talk about.
No, I mean, she succinctly, part of the reason why it struck such a chord with me is because it really hit home. I mean, I'm on the front lines of experiencing what draft beer sales are. And, it's not even just a business concern. It's like, it's something that hits like nostalgically for me, because I too learned about craft beer and learned to love craft beer through experiencing it on draft. There was always, arguably the best presentation of a product, or sometimes the only presentation of the product. And it was, without that, I wouldn't be where I am in the industry or with my experience in the beverage. So it really hurts it can always hurt to feel like you're outside of a trend or behind on a trend. But when that trend is draft beer, drinking draft beer going away or becoming less cool, then it's a real gut punch. I honestly, in her article, just speaking about the decline in numbers, like that's something we saw. I mean, anecdotally, even leading into COVID, we could see that things were like stable, if not slightly down. But I think COVID kind of worked as that like social stopgap, as we all know it was, obviously, that we got crash landed into like where trends were heading after a year and a half or two of normalcy being out the window. So, honestly, the new future of like where things are heading in the segment is one that we're still grappling with. There's been some changes, I would say, in recent months, but it looks a lot different than I think I would have anticipated in 2019 or the very first day of the pandemic. So yeah, I'm really curious to hear what you have to say about the article, Jimmy, because I know you come from this background too, and you probably have a lot to say.
Well, first thing I'm going to say is, what are the fun things about having draft beer in a public place? Besides what Kate said about seeing these fun, different setups and the mug clubs and all that, I think about the experience of just cheersing people, having a drink and especially a nice glass. And if the glass is proper, it's even better. And the toasting and the sounds of that, just clinking the glasses. And, I feel like, and then I'd add that to that, a high five or patting someone on the shoulder or shaking their hand. And, I do feel like there's memories that are made, and it's different than a liquor bar. It's different than, I love to taste mezcals and tequilas, and you can get something similar with that, but, it's pretty neat. The other one I was going to mention is, the other experience is something like a foam blowing contest. You know, things that were authentically like there's a bar in South Jersey. It's called Mugs. I don't know what it's called. The Ugly Mug, and it's in Cape May, New Jersey. And they have photos going back to the 50s and 60s. Every year in the fall, when the season's over, the locals gather, and they all get a mug of extra foamy beer. And it's a joke, but it's real. They all sit there and they do a countdown, and they blow and see whose foam goes the farthest.
That's amazing.
I love that.
So I think that if you go around the world, there's probably a number of experiences like this that you only get in a pub. And I also find that with beer, there's a gentle buzz to it. It's not like we're pushing, vodka sodas on people. I remember the one thing that really stands out for me is that I had two restaurant bars in New York City, and they both started with restaurant beer licenses, restaurant wine, which meant wine and beer licenses. And the reason it was interesting is that I started them both with only the wine and beer. We had food, and people would come in. Of course, they'd ask for a vodka soda, or something else like that. And when you didn't have the vodka soda, your staff was forced to reach just a little deeper and say, would you like to try this beer? And usually it got them hooked. They became regular customers. They would stay longer. They were more pleasant, and they probably also ordered food. And I noticed, because in both of my places, once I was open for years, I did add on a full liquor license. And I saw that the service could slip, because if someone comes in and says, I want a vodka soda, and you have it, you're not going to stop and say, well, why don't you try one of our 12 unique beers on draft? But I also felt like once we had the option of alcohol, it changed what the bar was. So that's a little intro on my end.
Yeah, I think that really hits on the cultural component that draft beer plays in contemporary drinking culture and like historical American drinking culture. I mean, we borrow a lot from sort of the English tavern tradition. And something I was thinking about as I was writing this article is that like a keg is a vessel designed for many people, right? It is inherent to public consumption. A can is for one person. You drink it, just you. It's not it can be part of a communal experience, but it's not really designed for that. And there's something I think really neat about a keg of beer and of pub and tavern and bar culture. And it's kind of remarkable to me how many people I see today at bars ordering cans of beer that's available on draft, right? Like bottles or cans of Coors Light or something, when I see the bar has a draft handle. And that to me is a fascinating conundrum. Why are people choosing the same beer in a packaged format versus a keg? And, I think a lot of that might have to do with perceived declines in draft beer quality, draft line cleaning, draft beer presentation, glassware, etc. I wonder if consumers just think packaged beer is more consistent. I'm curious if either of you see that, out and about in your worlds.
I honestly think, because we have the retail component to our store as well, and I think it's so ironic because years ago, no one wanted to touch the beer in the packaging, like especially when they're in cans. And now look at the market; there's like no bottles left; it's just cans. And the assumption was that the draft beer was higher quality because it was clean. So I mean, the assumption back then for people seeking us out was usually that the place was intentionally doing its craft beer as well as it possibly could and staying up on its cleaning schedule. But these days it's changed. I think the cultural shift at large, and this comes back to a lot of things I've seen with beer, is that craft beer is no longer a novelty. Gen Z coming of age into this, it's like something that it's a given. That beer is going to be good or should be good because it's something they've grown up around being different. They aren't breaking through from macros into this smaller community. Now it's, culturally, it's more viable and something that's more ever present. So I think for the most part, people coming in and kind of thinking that, well, this would have been cool. Like a couple of years ago, someone's like, wow, that's a really interesting Saison on draft. I want that. Whereas now someone comes in and they're like, well, they've got like a couple of IPAs in cans here, probably as like a backup in case the kegs go down. I'm going to get one of these instead because I don't really feel like exploring this. And I think Kate hit on something too with like the idea that people now just kind of assume because cans are so pervasive that it's just like there are so many options in cans now that the novelty of draft just isn't the draw that it used to be. And the pathway to discovery via draft is now not as important. But that's just what I've seen at least.
There was one thing about the earlier days of craft beer or beer bars in New York, which is my experience. It was people discovering the beer and just how accessible it was on draft. And I remember first couple of years at Jimmy's Number 43, so this was like 2005 or 6. You'd have people coming in asking for Stellas, and we made a point of having two different. In that case, it was Belgian pills or craft lagers, and we'd always. I guess it was an upsell, but once they tasted it, they really just wanted the pills. And the concept of ordering by style, people didn't really think about back then. Again, it goes back to having memorable experiences, in a public place. I have to say that I have a rant about cans because I never was really drinking much of any beers in cans, and I felt like in the pandemic it was the only choice. But as being on the radio show, I went from drinking beer with folks like you, Zach, in person on the radio show, which to drinking it at home by myself, and talking to someone online. And by the end of that shutdown, I was fed up with canned beer because I feel like that may have been one issue with the whole movement is that too many breweries were canning and there was less quality control. I just didn't really enjoy a lot of the cans I had at the end. So
if I never have to drink a can of beer on a Zoom call again, it'll be too soon.
I feel that. Yeah, I honestly agree. I mean, there's something about like the experience of it too. Like I know we're all pushing the same angle of the story here, which is like bemoaning the loss and like kind of, bemoaning or mourning the change. But there is like experientially too, like canned beer, even if you're pouring it into the glass, it's like still a little different. There's like something about the act of it being served to you. It's like a slight form of preparation, but like that being part of it and the intention of like being out in public and enjoying that. Like I remember there was a point, maybe I guess it's close to 20 years ago now when they're trying to popularize those home kegs. And I remember they never took off, mostly because the beer was terrible. But I always felt like the act of going out to a bar to order a beer was just as much a part of like being there to socialize with friends as it was that like commercial act of like going out and getting a coffee in the morning, ordering a sandwich. Like that's like a human interaction element to it that makes it nice. Whereas I feel like now people are focusing more on like getting exactly what they want, even if it means dumbing it down to the point where it's so safe it's not exactly exciting. So I think draft programs in general have started to reflect that. Like places, I think, not exactly beer specific bars, but places that once, not too long ago, might have had like, 6 to 8 things on draft are kind of pulling back to like 2 to 4 or something. Or I'm noticing around the city anyway that people are going can heavy on their lists as opposed to draft heavy. So I think it just kind of shows this is like everyone kind of chasing where the consumer mindset is at.
I think there's lots of different factors coming to bear on this. Like, yes, I think, a lot of it is consumers just not seeing the premium in draft beer, right? Or not seeing what's special about it. And to some extent, that behooves the industry to remind them of why that's special. And then on the other side, I think there's also, during the pandemic, there was a lot of issues with getting the right kind of help and fully staffing. And like in a lot of cases, you know, packaged beer is just way easier to serve. You don't have to train anybody to learn how to pour a proper beer, right?
Right. Exactly.
Which goes back to saying, then why should I go out? Because I could serve it myself at home, you know.
Which also happens to
honest,
be the Gen Z mindset, right? Or it seems to be. I mean, not to scapegoat or to blanket the generation, but the running gist of the article that Kate wrote being that Gen Z is a little bit more of a homebody generation, or they're less adventurous when they go out, or less willing to spend as much as maybe previous generations were. So yeah, I guess that does kind of bleed into that same mindset.
Kate, I have a radical concept. I think we can talk about it on the air. I when I came of age, the drinking age was 18, and the easiest thing in the world to do when you're 18 was go to a local bar or a student bar, get an affordable beer, and there was probably music playing, and I'd have, you know, a few beers, maybe 5, and then I would go home and sleep. And there was never any reason for me to think that I wanted anything more than a beer. And I took some time off. That's when I was in school. And when I came back a few years later, the drinking age was 21. And the experience on a Friday night, the same types of people, it wasn't going to those local bars where there was music playing and you could get some cheap beers. It was, we were lying in someone's room with 10 people in the dorm room doing ecstasy. And I really do think the drinking age, and I've said this before, like you can't say it when you have a license, but I felt like that the drinking age going up was ultimately, it definitely killed dive bars and student bars, but it really changed the industry. And, you know, restaurants became fancier and you had to be getting more per person, because you didn't have those students. And the other outtake of it was that while drinking at 18 was illegal, cannabis has become legal. And I do see that if you want to go to places where you can go to the liquor store and get your own canned beer or booze and have some cannabis, you're going to do it at home or in another space, a non-licensed space. So I feel like that drinking age going up from 18, maybe that wasn't the smartest thing after all. But that's probably another
That's
show.
a super interesting question. Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
I was gonna say, so I represent a rare example of someone who gets to experience the opposite of that. I went to college in Montreal, where the drinking age was 18 when I got there, and that was a huge novelty to me. Someone who was born in the middle of the 80s, only ever knew the drinking age to be 21, and something that you look forward to like down the line, or having to sneak around to do the American college experience. And the approach to beer up there is very different. I mean, for the reason why I am into beer as I am is because I was able to go up and order. Once the novelty of it wore off within a couple of weeks, you're out to dinner and you're like, this is an interesting, Montreal had a great beer scene at the time, and they still do, but I would go up to the bar and be like, I've never tried this like Belgian style before. I want to know what this is like, and like ordering that. And it definitely does, like, I think at that age in your life when you're out on your own for the first time or starting to make your own decisions and more meaningfully, it does matter. So I guess the opposite would be like the latest generation who had to go through some of the more fruitful or fun years in lockdown or not attending school in person. And that kind of radically changes it.
Yeah, I think when I speak with young consumers, which I do a lot, and it makes me feel like a withered crone, but it's very instructive. But, you know, I think when I'm talking to 21, 22, 23-year-olds who did have really formative social experiences during the pandemic, you know, what I hear from them is like they want their social time to feel comforting and comfortable and easy. Whereas I think my generation, millennials, like we wanted going out to be exciting and stimulating and almost like challenging. It's just a very different mindset. And I think that would manifest in the type of beverages you choose. Like maybe it's less that exploratory, blow me away with something new mindset and more like, I just want a familiar thing that I know I like and that makes me feel comfortable and doesn't require too much learning or challenging on my side. And I think, they get a little bit of a bad rap for that, but that's a perfectly fine attitude to have, right? You're spending your hard-earned money on a relaxing product or whatever. You want it to make you feel good, whatever that is for you. So I think that's just a different mindset. And it's hard to overarchingly speak about these generational shifts, but I feel like I hear that quite a bit, combined with, I feel like we have to mention the really strong decline in underage drinking rates in the US in over the last couple decades. Underage drinking has fallen off a cliff since the 90s, which is great. But it means that which, let me be clear, that's a very good thing. But once consumers turn 21, they're kind of, a lot of them are starting from square one, not just in terms of consuming alcohol, but maybe in terms of going out, right? If they were at lockdown and stuff, this is still a generation very much learning and coming into its own. And half of Gen Z is still under 21. So I think the jury is a little out still on how they're going to shake out kind of long-term in their attitudes, because it feels to me like they are very much still in the process of becoming who they're going to be as drinkers.
That's a great one. Hey, I want to two different themes I want to make sure we cover. We'll do this one after. I want to talk about great places to drink draft beer. But I wanted to start with my story of discovering draft beer. I've been in this industry since the early 90s, and I've been lucky to have been buying wine, beer, or liquor almost since then. And I was first turned on to specialty bottles like Trappist and Belgians, or something like Schneider Aventinus, which they weren't everyday drinks, but they were definitely celebratory. And it was really the first time that I was liking beer, other than a cheap beer in a college bar. And when I really got turned on to draft, I had a different bar before Jimmy's Number 43, and one of the reps was really insistent on getting me to try some draft beer. And we had customers asking for draft, as well. So he brought in a jockey box. And, now everyone snobs about their draft systems. But at the time, a jockey box has a very short run. You ice the coils every day. And I can't flaw a good, well-poured draft out of a jockey box. But at the time, I got turned on to IPA. We had one line of Victory Hop Devil IPA, a classic IPA from Pennsylvania, and the other line was a rotating selection of a Vita beer, most often from Louisiana, amber or this dark beer that I still can't remember the name of. And that kind of got me hooked, and the light went off, and in 2005 I opened a new spot, which was Jimmy's Number 43, and I built that beer bar business around my favorite 12 beers on draft, and food to go with it. And if I hadn't tried out the jockey box, I hadn't tasted those beers that way, I might have never known. I might have thought that great bottle beer was the ultimate, and probably still drink more wine. Mm. So that's my little intro.
It helps to have that kind of formative bar or friend or whomever that, becomes that introduction, like the Hop Leaf was for me, kind of someone to hold your hand and introduce you to the wide and beautiful world.
Well, and another thing we're not talking about either is it's homebrewing too. I don't know if you follow the trends with homebrewers, but these days when I meet people out and about, if they like beer, they often have homebrewed when other people may not be thinking beer. I don't know if that's a talking point for you guys.
I've actually never homebrewed myself. I credit to my location in New York City as part of that. I definitely know some homebrewers, but yeah, I do. It's like the home chef culinary fan route. It's a similar thing. I don't know what your experiences are lately. I feel like it's much more popular with people who are a little older than I am than it is with anyone my age, and less so with people who are younger. So that is another drastic change I've seen. But yeah, but it is certainly an exploration of the passion for beer that comes through, right? So yeah, I have no way of gauging that though. It's just all anecdotal, but
Yeah, the reporting that I've done on homebrewing lately, which probably is a year old at this point, I wrote something for Good Beer Hunting about the. I think the only metric we have to really gauge the quantitative popularity of homebrewing is membership in things like the AHA, American Homebrewers Association, and various homebrewing clubs, and those numbers are down overall versus historic highs in the early 2010s. I think the pandemic was a little boost, probably while we were making sourdough. Maybe we were also making beer. But
You know what I did with my sourdough? You want to hear about my sourdough?
I want to hear about everyone's sourdough.
I threw it out like I did every 5 years when I tried to make it. I start losing track of it after a few weeks.
oh no.
It requires a lot of upkeep. It is no joke to feed that thing every day.
I never even tried.
You're way ahead of us, Zach. You're a fully formed adult.
I think I was maybe at the tail end of the real link between homebrewing and craft beer appreciation. I had friends who homebrewed, but I personally never got super duper into it. And I mean, some of that was spatial constraints in an apartment and things like that. But also, I mean, when there was just so much good beer available in every style you could imagine, it was, I think, some of the impetus for older homebrewers I've spoken to was I went abroad and I had this beer and then I couldn't find anything like that here in the States. Well, that wasn't my experience, right? I can find anything I want. So, and probably of a way higher quality than whatever I would make in a closet. So, so there was a little less of that need when there was so much professionally great craft beer being made and imports, and just I didn't feel the need to have to.
I suppose it's the same thing for me. The most of the styles that I ever had were people doing things that I could find in the store, and they were always, a tick or two below what I could get, purchase outside. So I never dove into it in the same way, and also location restraints. But definitely, yeah, I had a similar experience to Kate.
Okay. Well, now let's go to the positive part and wrap it up. Great places to drink draft beer. Zach, you mentioned Montreal, and did you ever go into Dieu du Ciel?
Of course. Absolutely love that place.
What was the experience like there as a customer?
I mean, Unibrew, you mean? Or Dieu du Ciel, sorry, yeah. So Dieu du Ciel, when I was actually living in Montreal, I wasn't aware of them. Unibrew was the big local brewery, and they're not actually in Montreal. But they were widely available. But by the time I was leaving the city, a bunch of small brew pubs had opened up, and it was a novelty at that point. And a lot of my friends, we would make it a point to go to these bars where we could try a place called Benelux, which actually ended up becoming quite popular in the end. We were there for the earliest days, and my friends and I would go out and just sample and kind of teach ourselves as we went along, with no intention of becoming experts or anything. We were just genuinely curious about what they had. And the vibe in Montreal was presented. It's so effortless and carefree that it's maintained. I mean, that's evergreen. That's just the way the city is. The Frenchness really comes through on that. These days I still go up there, and you can't throw the proverbial dead cat without hitting a place worth eating or drinking out there. But there's a place that I used to haunt when I was in college called Reservoir, which is out in the plateau just up Saint Laurent, and it was such a great spot for me back then because it was a cozy place. They had a decent amount of outdoor seating, which when the temperature finally hits 48 degrees up there, people start losing their minds and want to sit outdoors. So it was coveted for that. But I went back with my wife on a trip a couple of years ago, and I was blown away by how much a place I loved got even better over time. And now every time I go back to Reservoir, they've got delicious beer that they're brewing there. In a way that I feel like a lot of small scale brew pubs in the US have kind of started to slip away from. Everyone kind of aims to be these bigger projects. This place still manages to do something I tried so many different styles of beer there, from like English ales through Belgian styles, saisons. It was really just eye opening. Um, so that place sticks out in my mind. If we're talking Montreal, one of the best non like large brewery experiences I've had drinking a beer, and I loved it there. Not to mention a killer Canadian wine selection, which I was really excited to dive into.
Hmm.
Kate, what about you? A great place to drink draft
Oh
beer.
man. I think if I were trying to sort of explain to someone the magic of draft beer, I would want to send them to a brewery like Machine House in Seattle, or Hogshead in Denver, or Cohesion in Denver, where the way the beer is served, off an engine or off a Czech side pull or something, changes the texture of the beer. Because I think that's the moment when the light bulb goes off for people, that draft beer is not just liquid being poured into a glass and it's the same every time. It's how it is poured and the vessel into which it is poured and the temperature it's served at. All of that contributes to very different textural, multi-sensory experiences. So those are some of my favorite places to kind of scratch that itch for just like a different texture and something you can't replicate at home, right? Like you can't pour the classic beer engine, bitter at home. It's just not, you don't have that technology. So I think those are places that can really open people's eyes. When I was in London 8 years ago with a friend of mine from the States, who she's not particularly into beer, but when we went to like proper pubs and she was like, this beer, like, why is this different? Like, she's struggling to put her finger on it, and explaining beer engines to her and all that. It really makes that connection for people, and I think it's really cool to watch that light bulb go off for folks.
I completely agree with Kate, because the context of like, there's certain things like side pulls and things like that. Even a simple Guinness is something that's so hard that there's no way to replicate like a well poured pint of something like that at home. Like traveling, I've learned too that like there's certain idiosyncrasies about different places that might make you appreciate it more, on top of the social element of being someplace and like meeting the locals and talking to them, whether it's domestically or internationally even. I've had some of the biggest beer epiphanies just stepping out to order a drink from draft. Weird cask stuff in England to just like weird dive bar stuff in Nashville. And it's always like one of those things that stands out in my memories when I leave. So yeah, I think it's part of the experience to be able to order like that.
Zach, I'm glad you mentioned Guinness. Kate, do you know if the numbers for Guinness poured in Irish bars in America has gone up or down or stayed the same?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't, off the top of my head, know the answer to that. But have you seen all the kids on TikTok trying to split the G? Do you know about this?
I'm one of those kids.
The kids are all right. They're drinking Guinness again. They're gonna be just fine.
So we'll have to check that out. Split the G. We'll leave it at that. I'm going to tell you some of my. Well, you guys keep talking when you got great ideas like you do. Some of my more recent great draft beer experiences. A couple years ago, I was sitting in Brighton, Boston, with Chris Loring of Notch Brewing, and he has a beer he makes once a year. It's a pitch line pills, and he'll serve that on the Lucre. And I got a chance to talk to him and sit and drink it with him, fresh from the tap. That for me was my best beer on draft in many years. Or something simple like sometimes I go up to Portland, Maine, and I'll go into Novare Reds, it's really the place you do want to talk about places you want to drink draft beer. That the whole culture of that is people having draft beers, and the simplest thing like a Taurus Bulba on draft, you'll always find something like that, a hoppy pale ale. It's my happy place if you have to have a happy place. And I don't feel like I'm backwards. Like I've never been someone that just loved beer more than anything else. Like when I first started out, I didn't necessarily go to beer, and I still don't every day. But if I'm going, my experience with beer is I want to be drinking in more likely a pub or a beer bar, somewhere where beer is appreciated and it's served on draft or cask or some other vessel like that.
Amen to
So
that.
that's about all I have to say.
Well,
Anybody, once you guys
I feel you on the. I
keep
gotta
going,
say too,
please
you
keep
just
going.
reminded me of another really great memory. It wasn't super recent, but I'm from Salem, or like the Salem area, and I got to do Notch, and by happy accident, I was taking my wife to the brewery because I like every time I'm home visiting my folks, I like to stop in. Happened to stumble upon the Kolsch Day that they were doing, or Kolsch Festival, where the whole experience of like the Krantz is coming out and they put the glass down and keep bringing them until you put the coaster on top. That's like the sort of like convivial experience that, like, not to mention the beer's delicious. Um, and that was the kind of experience that like I feel like, no pun intended, very thirsty for a long time. That sort of that vibe that we used to get every year, and I think it still exists in some form, but the Zoom Schneider Oktoberfest, where it is just like the best party you've ever been to. Not because you're drinking the beer. The beer is just like the through line, but the idea that everyone's coming together and agreeing that like right now we're just gonna hang out, shoot the shit, and we're gonna keep pouring the beers until we feel like we're ready to go home, and that kind of embrace. So yeah, I'm really glad you brought up Notch, because that is the other uh, kind of experience that I feel like was really amplified in person.
And Chris is really neat. He posted something recently. He said years ago, I think he was one of the first places in America to use the Lucre tap, and I think he said he got the option to be the exclusive importer of it, and he had no idea what he was missing out on. So, but I think he's having fun. Okay, anything else about these other? We could talk all day about cask beers and Guinness pours, but Lucre pour. How much do people get up and go out just to get a Lucre pour? Like that's what I'm
I
curious. Like, like Zach was saying, he's parched and he's thinking about the Kolsch service. Right now, I'm parched and I'm thinking about a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, the understanding of what a lucre pour is or whatever is, or how cask ale works is probably limited to a very narrow segment of the beer drinking population. However, what gives me, sort of hope for a draft revival perhaps in the future is, as Zach mentioned, things like Kolsch service or like interesting interactive beer experiences at bars and breweries that tie draft beer to sort of a larger experience, because we know that young people and people of all generations are looking now when they go out, they want some kind of like an immersive experience. It's the reason that Top Golf and barcades and things exist. Like people want to do more than just sit on a stool and drink a beer. I mean, I am happy doing that, but apparently a lot of other people require entertainment. And I think, things like Kolsch service and these various like kind of cultural events around draft beer are the way that you're going to get young people interested, because it's a memory and it's an experience and it's something you can put on your Instagram and it's something different, right? It's something you can't recreate, and it just gives people a reason to go. Here in Missoula, Montana, where I live, I know one of our local, our Western Cider, our local cidery is doing a wassail event in a couple weeks, and like that's weird.
Awesome.
And yeah, and like weird
That's
and
so cool,
strange.
though.
And yeah, people wear costumes and they make flower crowns and it's outside. It's super pagan and strange. And like, that's amazing. There's music and people get excited about stuff like that because it's different. And yes, you're drinking, draft cider or whatever, but that's almost ancillary to the whole event, but also the event can't happen without the cider, or Oktoberfest can't happen without the beer. So again, I think, connecting draft beer or draft cider, whatever, to these sort of convivial, interesting experiences is the way that this is going to come back.
It's interesting you mentioned that too, because the experiential thing and the event thing used to be. I remember when we first opened up, everyone was pushing tap takeovers and that sort of thing, and like beer events like that down our throats. And it didn't take too long for that to become completely like lose its novelty, and they weren't a draw whatsoever. I'd say a couple of years into us being open. But now, when you add even a simple element, like I've been doing a thing lately where I shuck an oyster, that will bring someone out because they're like, this isn't just going out for a drink. I'm gonna have an oyster with my beer, or we're doing different food pop-ups, and they're like, yo, I'm gonna come out and try some new food and have a drink, or we have my friend come through and do tarot card readings and like a guided coloring, mindful coloring book thing, and people come out, buy the coloring book, order their drink, and hang out. So it is, and it's. I mean, obviously, it also has resulted in a dearth of axe throwing bars and things like that, but which seem to be everywhere. But it also is sort of like the more like seemingly mundane stuff that I've found to be pretty effective in getting people in the front door.
Mm. Yeah, you're an events planner now.
Yeah, I am. I really am.
There's an axe throwing bar near me that I'll just go there and sit at the bar so I can watch everybody throw their axes.
Amazing.
Be careful of the strays.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I'm not. Kate, last thing, Pub January. I love that Jeff Allworth is trying to help create this same kind of conversation for January and Pub January. You guys have anything to say about that concept? Because I like it.
I like it. My if we're talking radical ideas like lowering the drinking age and going to pubs in January and other radical notions, I'm gonna throw my weight behind make beer pitchers a thing again. I know they're like a horrible serving vessel. I know we can't recommend them as beer professionals in terms of like what they do to beer. However, I think they touch on a lot of needs that like draft beer can like sometimes feel like it doesn't meet, such as, being like a really economical option. It being something that like people you don't have to make a decision when someone orders a pitcher of beer, right? You're just like, oh yeah, like I'll have what everyone else is having, right? You can split the bill evenly. Like I love so much about beer pitchers as this like a really great social thing, if not exactly, hashtag proper glassware. But I don't know. I'm kind of like here to make beer pitchers a thing. I'll plant my flag there.
It's
like
so
that.
funny.
And you can get a pitcher when you're at the axe throwing bar. You could go bowling and have stuff.
Right? And thank God for bowling alleys, or else we'd never see a beer pitcher. There's actually a couple like sports bars here in Missoula that do them, and me and my friends we'll get a pitcher of Sierra Nevada Pale Ale or like Coors Light or something, and it seems like a fun novelty, but it's also just really nice to not have to make decisions sometimes, and I love that.
Oh God, yeah, the decision fatigue was so real. Part of the reason why I think where we are is because it got to a point where you had to have something new every time, so we ended up with something you maybe didn't love. But yes, I am also here for the pitcher revival. Count me in.
Yay, there's at least 2 of us now.
Yeah.
I like it too.
3. We're a movement.
There are dozens of us.
I just don't want Bud Light. That's
Fair
all.
enough,
I just don't want Bud Light.
Fair enough. Fair.
Okay. But I also like Zach's bringing up the Kolsch service, which is kind of like a pitcher because it's like a
So
tray
true.
with all your
So
pre-made
true.
It's a bunch
glasses.
of tiny pitchers.
What is a pint glass or a Stange if not just a tiny pitcher, really?
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, hopefully you guys got some good stories out of this. Kate, I just want to say it was a pleasure getting to know you better as you just stepped down as the head of the North American Guild of Beer Writers.
Oh, thank you.
You're a really important influence on the community. Is there anything you want to say about your time there?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it was just a real honor to lead that organization for 2 years. It was a role I didn't really think I was going to step into, but the talent and the creativity and passion of the membership is really incredible, and I couldn't have asked for a better group of people to lead and to learn from. And it was just such a great experience. And Pat Walls is our new director, and I know he is going to just take the organization and run with it. He's so smart and creative and has a lot of big ideas. So I am excited to stay a member of the board of directors of the North American Guild of Beer Writers, but see where Pat leads it.
As a card-carrying member, I have to say I appreciate you did such a great job. And I know you said you never want to drink another beer in a Zoom call again, but those meetups, those could be really fun. So I appreciated that.
Oh, thank you. They were fun. I mean, everyone was it was so great to see people's faces that I wouldn't otherwise get to see outside of maybe Craft Brewers Conference or something.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was one of the bright notes of the pandemic, because I was on some of the Zooms, and I did get to meet people from all over the country. Since then we've done, I don't know how many shows, at least 20 shows through Emily Hudo at Ragcraft Beer, and I got to know the Craft Maltsters Guild. Those are just two. Gerard Fagerberg.
Yep.
Got to know him. Brian Alberts, the historian. We just did a show with him. So that's a great resource. I mean, to think that all these great people writing about beer and making shows about it are all in one place. Really
That's what it's about, is those connections. And thanks, Jimmy, for being and Zach for being such, involved members and like connecting with each other. I mean, the guild kind of just exists as a structure to make those connections happen. But people, that's exactly it. What you have both talked about, of meeting other people and making projects and podcasts and articles together. That's why the guild exists. And it's not really, I don't even know that that's a feature of the guild's leadership. I think that's just like, when you get a bunch of writers and storytellers together, they're gonna be yapping, and that's what happens.
We are notoriously yappers, yes.
Yes, card-carrying yappers, professional yappers, even.
Indeed.
Well, any last words, anybody?
I wish you had a draft beer right now. I think cheers you guys with.
Sure do. Well, how about this? What's on, if we were at Alphabet City Beer right now, what should I drink?
Oh, well, I mean, like I always tell everyone who walks in, follow your heart, because we do maintain a diverse setup of styles. We're not one of those places that does 6 out of 12 lines IPA, but we're still focused on a lot of local stuff with like your peppered in international hit. And right now I have, I distinctly remember going in the other day and pouring myself a Grim Super Spruce and being so thrilled with it, because I just hadn't had I hadn't poured myself a sour beer in so long. So if you find yourself aching for some sprucey, sour, vaguely salty beer that kind of just like relivens the palate after a season of very decadent, rich food, I highly suggest it.
That sounds lovely.
Sounds great. Well, listen, you guys, thanks so much for joining me here on Heritage Radio Network. Listeners, you can become a member and support us at heritageradionetwork.org. Big shout out to our new engineer, Sam, our head engineer, Gabe. I'm Jimmy Carboni. I'm the host. Big thank you to Kate and Zach. We'll catch you next time on Beer Sessions Radio. All right. Thanks so much, guys.